You have spent years becoming competent. Years of learning, reading, watching, absorbing. You have worked hard to know things, to be someone who knows things. And somewhere along the way, without quite meaning to, that became part of your identity. So when a question arrives that you cannot answer, something tightens. Not quite embarrassment. Not yet. But close. A small contraction in the chest. A quick scan of the room. A rehearsal of reasons you already have in mind. Why you do not have an answer right now. Why this particular thing was never your area. Why it should not matter. It does matter. That is why you're rehearsing. There is a kind of exhaustion that comes from always needing to be the person who has it figured out. It is quiet exhaustion. The kind that does not announce itself. The kind that shows up as a reluctance to ask questions, as a subtle tension in conversations where someone knows more than you do, as a faint but persistent discomfort with your own uncertainty. This episode is about that discomfort, and about what happens when you stop running from it. There is a person, maybe you recognize something in them, who has always been the one people turn to, at work, at family dinners, among friends. They are the one who researches before speaking, who forms an opinion only after reading several sources, who feels a quiet pride in not being careless with their words. This has served them well. People trust their judgment. They are known as someone who thinks before they speak, but then something shifts. A new project arrives, one that requires knowledge they do not have. A conversation moves into territory that is unfamiliar. A younger colleague speaks with an ease and fluency they do not feel. And instead of simply saying, "I am not sure about this," or "I would need to look into it more," something else takes over. They talk around it, they redirect. They offer what they do know, generously, hoping it covers the gap. Or they go quiet in a way that is meant to look thoughtful, but is actually a kind of hiding. Later, alone, they feel something like shame. Not because they did not know, but because they could not simply say so. The not knowing was not the problem. The inability to admit it, that is where the weight comes from. There was a man in ancient Athens who was declared by the oracle at Delphi to be the wisest person alive. He was confused by this. He did not feel wise. So he went out and began talking to people who were considered experts. Politicians, poets, craftsmen, people known for their knowledge and their standing. And what he found again and again was that these people believed they knew things they did not actually know. They had filled in uncertainty with confidence. They had mistaken familiarity for understanding. They spoke with authority in areas where, if pressed carefully, if followed far enough down the thread, they had very little real foundation. The confidence was real. The knowledge beneath it was not always there. And Socrates, this is the man, eventually concluded something quietly radical. Perhaps the oracle was right, not because he knew more than everyone else, but because he was. Perhaps the only one who was honest about what he did not know. That awareness of the edges of your own understanding was itself a form of wisdom. Not knowing and knowing you do not know are two very different things. The distance between them is not a small one. Most people collapse that distance without noticing. They move from uncertainty into a kind of performed certainty so quickly, so habitually, that they can no longer feel where one ends and the other begins. The person in that meeting, the one who talked around the gap, they were not lacking intelligence. They were lacking permission. Permission they had never thought to give themselves. Permission that no one, probably, had ever modeled for them. Because the people around them, the ones they had watched, learned from, tried to emulate those people, also did not say, "I do not know." They also redirected. They also covered. The pattern gets passed down, not through instruction but through example. And after a while you stop noticing it as a pattern at all. It just starts to feel like how things are done. Here's what makes this harder than it sounds. The fear of not knowing is not really about knowledge. It is about what you believe not knowing says about you. At some point, perhaps early, perhaps gradually, many people arrive at an unspoken equation. My value is connected to what I know. My usefulness, my credibility, maybe even my belonging, depends on having answers, on being the person in the room who can orient others when things get unclear. Once that equation is in place, a gap in your knowledge does not feel like a gap in information. It feels like a gap in you. So the response to uncertainty becomes protective. You speak with more confidence than you feel. You avoid subjects where you are on uncertain ground, not dramatically, not obviously, but with small practiced deflections that have become so natural, you barely register them. You become slightly defensive in conversations where someone challenges what you think you know. Not hostile, just careful, just a little more closed than open. You experience a strange mix of curiosity and dread when you encounter how much there is that you have not yet understood. Curiosity, because you are drawn to it. Because part of you, the part that existed before all of this, genuinely wants to know things, still finds ideas interesting, still lights up when something new comes into focus. Dread, because encountering the unknown means encountering the limit of yourself. That is a difficult place to live, and a lonely one. Because the more you protect the image of someone who knows, the less room there is for you to actually learn. The performance and the real thing begin to work against each other. And somewhere beneath the performance, some part of you is aware of that. You are aware that the pose is costing you something. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily over time, in the accumulation of conversations where you said something confident and felt hollow afterward. In the accumulation of questions you did not ask because you were afraid of what the asking would reveal. Socrates was interested in a particular kind of conversation, not debate. Not one person trying to win an argument or establish superiority. Not a performance of knowledge for an audience. Something more like a shared investigation. Two people examining an idea together, genuinely, willing to follow the thought wherever it went, even if it led somewhere that made them uncomfortable. Even if it led back to square one. Even if it revealed that what they had believed with great confidence for a long time was actually sitting on very thin ground. He called this kind of dialogue a way of testing ideas, and he was not afraid to be the one whose idea failed the test. That was, in fact, part of the point. You could not get closer to truth, to anything real, if you were too attached to your current position. Attachment to being right made you blind to what was actually there. This is not a natural state for most people. It is not a state that most environments encourage. Most people learn early that being wrong is dangerous. In school, wrong answers were marked in red. The correction was public. The right answer was rewarded, and the wrong one was recorded, sometimes literally, on a report card, in a permanent file, somewhere. In families, confidence was often rewarded more than curiosity. In workplaces, uncertainty can look like weakness, and weakness can have consequences. The culture around knowledge tends to prize the person who has answers, not the person who sits quietly with an open question. So over time, the behavior that gets reinforced is the behavior of appearing to know, not necessarily knowing, appearing to. And the behavior that gets quietly penalized, or at least not encouraged, is the behavior of honest uncertainty. The pattern, the covering, the redirecting, the careful performance of competence makes complete sense in that context. It is not a character flaw. It is not a failure of intelligence or courage. It is an adaptation. A learned response to a real environment with real consequences. But adaptation is not the same as truth. And the self that adapted, the self that learned it to never not know, to always have something ready, to always come prepared, that self is tired. Because the world keeps changing, because other people keep surprising you. Because the information you have mastered in one domain does not transfer cleanly to the next one. Because no amount of preparation can fully close the distance between what you know and what is real. Socrates did not find that distance frightening. He found it fascinating. He spent his life in that gap, not despite the uncertainty, but because of it. The uncertainty was where the real questions lived. It was where thinking actually happened, as opposed to the rehearsal of things you had already decided. That shift, from fear of the unknown to curiosity about it, is not a personality type. It is not something you either have or you do not. It is more like a practice, a choice, made again and again, in small moments that do not feel especially significant until you look back and notice how much they added up to. It begins in the body, usually, before it becomes a conscious decision. The slight tension before you speak. The half-second where you know you are about to reach for a confident-sounding thing that is not quite true. The small internal weight of saying something that lands well but does not land honestly. Once you start to notice those signals, not to judge them, just to notice, something begins to loosen. You start to feel the distance between what is real and what you're presenting. And that distance, once felt, is hard to unfeel. That is not comfortable, but it is honest. And honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, tends to take up less space than the ongoing work of managing an image that is slightly larger than the truth. There is something that happens in a conversation when someone says, "Honestly, I do not know." Not as a deflection. not with an excuse attached, not followed immediately by everything they do know as a kind of compensation. Just, I do not know. Something in the room settles. The other person relaxes slightly. The conversation becomes real in a way it was not before. Because what they are hearing is not just an absence of information. They are hearing, I am not performing for you. I am not managing how you see me. I am actually here, with you, looking at this thing honestly, without trying to control where it lands. There is a quality of presence in that kind of honesty that no amount of competence can replicate. You can be the most knowledgeable person in a room and still make people feel strangely alone. And you can know very little and make them feel genuinely met. The difference is not in the content, it is in the quality of contact. Socrates had this quality. He was famous not for the answers he gave very few, if any, but for the quality of his questions. For the way he made people feel that what they thought they understood was worth examining more carefully. That examination was not an attack. It was a form of respect. He was not diminishing them by questioning their certainty. He was taking their ideas seriously enough to actually look at them. That is what intellectual humility actually looks like in practice. Not weakness, not self-deprecation, not a constant performance of not knowing in order to seem approachable. Genuine engagement with what is real rather than what is comfortable. A willingness to let your ideas be tested by the actual world and the actual people in front of you rather than protecting them from contact. It is harder than it sounds, but it is also lighter. There is less to carry when you're not maintaining a fiction. The person who could not say I do not know in that meeting, they were not afraid of looking unintelligent. Not exactly. They were afraid of losing something, a sense of standing, a sense of being needed. Perhaps a sense of being safe in the way that being the competent one had always made them feel safe. Not dramatically safe, not consciously, but safe in the background of every room they walked into. The way a familiar object in a familiar place creates a quiet sense of ground. That fear is understandable. It comes from somewhere. It was built over time, in response to things that actually happened. In response to moments when not knowing did cost something. Credibility, belonging, love, approval. The protection was earned. It served a purpose, but the cost of that protection compounds. Because every time you cover a gap instead of acknowledging it, you move slightly further from the kind of honesty that allows real understanding of the world and of yourself. Every covered gap is a small agreement you make to maintain a version of reality that is a little bit false. And those small agreements accumulate. They become the architecture of how you move through the world. Socrates believed that the unexamined life was not worth living. That phrase is often quoted as if it means you should read more books, or think more deeply, or engage with bigger ideas. But the examination he was talking about was more uncomfortable than that. It meant sitting with your own uncertainty. It meant being willing to discover that what you thought you knew about ideas, about other people, about yourself, might not hold up under careful attention. It meant returning to questions you thought you had already answered and discovering they were still open. That kind of examination is not a project you complete. It is not something you do once thoroughly and then move on from. It is more like a way of being with yourself. A willingness to stay curious about your own interior, to notice when you're covering something, to feel the contraction that happens right before the deflection, and to pause there, just for a moment, before deciding what to do. Some of the most important moments of growth do not feel like growth at the time. They feel like small, slightly uncomfortable choices to be a little more honest than the situation required. A small admission, a real question, a sentence that begins I'm not sure and does not immediately recover into certainty. These moments rarely feel significant. They almost never get marked, but they accumulate. And what they accumulate into is a self that is easier to live inside, one that does not require constant maintenance, that does not have to check its own stories against itself before speaking. That pause is the practice, not the grand gesture, not the dramatic confession of everything you do not know, just the pause. The half-second of honest contact with what is actually true before the trained response kicks in. The person who has spent years being the one who knows, they do not need to become someone else. They do not need to perform uncertainty any more than they performed certainty. What they might simply do, one day, is pause before the next deflection and ask, what would actually happen if I said the truth here? Not what do I risk? Not what will they think? But what is actually true and what does it cost me to say it? That question, asked sincerely, is already the beginning of something. What if not knowing was not the problem? What if the only real problem was the story you built around it? The story that said not knowing means something about you, means you are less than, means you have failed at the thing you were supposed to have figured out? The fear of looking foolish is, at its root, a fear of being seen as less than the version of yourself you have been carefully curating. But that version is already a kind of fiction, not because you are dishonest, but because no one is the full, complete, always certain person they sometimes present. That person does not exist. What exists is someone who knows some things, suspects others, and is honestly uncertain about a great deal more than they usually say. Socrates walked through Athens asking questions. He was not a professor. He held no institutional position. He had no credentials to display. He had almost nothing, except a genuine desire to understand, and the willingness to say out loud when he did not. That willingness was not modesty. It was not a technique. It was courage. You do not have to know everything. You probably suspected this already, but suspecting it and actually living from it are different things. Living from it means letting a question sit unanswered without rushing to fill the silence. It means saying, "I had not thought about it that way," and meaning it. It means asking something in a room full of people without calculating first whether the question will make you look good or expose something you would rather keep covered. It means trusting that the honest version of you, the one who sometimes does not know, who is still figuring things out, who is genuinely uncertain about more than it is comfortable to admit, is more interesting, more present, and more real than the curated one. That this version has more to offer, not less. That trust does not arrive all at once. It comes slowly, in small moments of honesty that do not collapse the way you feared they would. In conversations that went somewhere real because you stopped managing them. In the quiet that follows, saying something true in a room where you expected it to cost you. The wisest person in Athens was wise because he knew what he did not know. That kind of wisdom is still available. Not as a destination, not as an achievement. Just as a direction, one you can turn toward, a little at a time, whenever you are ready.